Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that feels more relevant by the second: behavioral addiction. We're going to look at the science of how we can hijack our brains and, maybe most importantly, try to figure out that super fine line between a harmless habit and a real, genuine problem.
Come on, you know the feeling, right? That little vibration in your pocket, the pull of an online flash sale, or that just one more level promise a game makes to you at 2 a.m. Turns out, these aren't just little quirks of living in the 21st century. For some people, they can be the on-ramp to a really powerful and often really misunderstood kind of addiction.
So, let's get on the same page. What are we actually talking about here? A behavioral addiction is, at its core, a compulsion. It's an overwhelming urge to do something that feels rewarding, but isn't a drug, over and over again, even when it's clearly causing damage in your life. That's the key right there, the compulsion plus the negative consequences. This isn't just about loving an activity, it's about feeling like you can't stop, even when a part of you really wants to.
Now, you might think this is a super new idea, born out of the internet age, but this conversation has been building for a long time. For most of the 20th century, if you said addiction, people immediately thought of chemical substances, alcohol, nicotine, things like that. But then, back in the 90s, researchers started noticing that the exact same patterns of compulsion and harm were showing up in people's behaviors. And that, right there, was a huge shift in how we understand the whole concept of addiction.
Okay, so how on earth can a simple action, like scrolling or shopping, become as addictive as a drug? Well, to get that, we need to pop the hood and look at our brain's reward circuit. This is the system that can take a simple pleasure and hardwire it into a powerful, almost unbreakable compulsion.
It pretty much all starts with this simple but incredibly powerful cycle, the dopamine loop. First, something happens. That's the trigger. It could be the ding of a notification, an ad that pops up, or even just a thought about a game. Your brain responds by releasing a little hit of dopamine. Now, a lot of people call dopamine the pleasure chemical, but it's more accurate to call it the motivation chemical. Its real job is to tell your brain, hey, that was good, pay attention, and do it again. And that's the reinforcement. It creates a loop that just gets stronger and stronger every single time you repeat it.
So if dopamine is the gas pedal in this loop, what's the key that keeps the whole engine running? Well, researchers have zeroed in on this one crucial molecule called delta phosphB. Now, it's called a gene transcription factor, which is just a really fancy way of saying it acts like a master molecular switch for addiction. And here's the wild part. This same exact switch gets flipped on by both addictive drugs and compulsive behaviors. It's the biological bridge that connects the two.
And here's how that addiction really takes hold and digs in. See, unlike a lot of other proteins in our body that get flushed out pretty quickly, delta phosphB is incredibly stable. It just hangs around. So every time you repeat the behavior, more and more of it builds up in your brain's reward centers. As it accumulates, it literally starts to physically rewire your neural pathways. Just think of it like you're carving a groove in your brain. That groove becomes the path of least resistance. And the deeper that groove gets, the harder it is to avoid falling right back into that behavior. So with all of this brain science piling up, you'd think the medical community would just be like, yep, makes sense, case closed. But not so fast. The road from a scientific discovery to an official medical diagnosis has actually been really long and honestly pretty controversial.
This timeline really tells the story of this slow but steady march toward acceptance. A massive moment happened in 2013. That's when the DSM-5, which is kind of the Bible of American psychiatry, officially moved gambling disorder. They took it out of the impulse control section and put it right into the chapter on substance-related and addictive disorders. That was the very first time a behavior was officially called an addiction. Then in 2019, the American Society of Addiction Medicine updated its own definition to explicitly include compulsive behaviors. And just recently, in 2022, the World Health Organization's Global Manual added gaming disorder as a brand new, diagnosable condition. But, and this is a big but, this is not a settled issue, not by a long shot. While the tide is definitely turning, for every behavior like gambling that gets official recognition, there are tons of others, like shopping, work, or internet addiction, where the experts are still debating. They're asking really tough questions like, are these actual distinct disorders, or are they just symptoms of other problems like anxiety or depression? The science is still very much in motion.
So this brings us out of the lab and into the real world. Beyond the diagnostic manuals and the brain scans, what do these compulsions actually look like? Well, the reality is that it's a huge, wide-ranging spectrum of behaviors.
I mean, just look at this list of behaviors that are being studied right now. It's long. And while gambling and gaming disorder have those official diagnostic codes, all these others are in various stages of research and debate.
What's so fascinating, and frankly what makes this so complicated, is that many of these are things we do every single day. Work, shop, exercise. That's what makes drawing that line between a healthy passion and a harmful problem so incredibly tricky.
This comparison right here is a perfect example of the challenge. For years, people threw around the term internet addiction, but experts quickly realized that's just way too broad. Are you addicted to the internet itself, or are you addicted to what you're doing on the internet, like gaming or shopping or social media? Because it was so vague, it never got officially recognized. But contrast that with gaming disorder. It's much more specific. The WHO defines it with really clear criteria. You've lost control over your gaming, you're prioritizing it over everything else, and you keep doing it even when it's causing obvious problems. That specificity is what got it over the line to become an official diagnosis.
Okay, here's another really crucial distinction that often gets blurred: binge eating disorder and food addiction. They sound really similar, but psychologically they're pretty different. Binge eating disorder, or BED, usually happens in distinct episodes or attacks, and the motivation is often about soothing some kind of emotional pain, like stress or issues with body image, and it's almost always followed by this wave of intense guilt and shame. Food addiction, on the other hand, is seen as more of a continuous pattern, is driven by a craving for a specific food, almost like a substance, or even just the act of eating itself. You'll often see classic addiction signs like tolerance and withdrawal. And critically, denial is really common, with much less of that guilt or body concern that's so central to BED.
So, all of this leads us to what is probably the most important question for a lot of us. Where is the line? How do we know when a deep passion, or a really strong work ethic, or even just a bad habit finally crosses over into a harmful addiction?
This quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Our culture has such a complicated relationship with obsessive behavior. We'll call someone a workaholic and mean it as a compliment, praising their dedication. We celebrate the athlete who is addicted to their training. Society often rewards the very same behaviors that, if you just change the context a little bit, we would label as a serious problem. This is the question we really have to ask ourselves, right? When does that drive to succeed, or that love for a hobby, or that thing you do to unwind, when does it start to take more from you than it gives back? When does it stop feeling like a choice and start feeling like you have no choice at all?
From a clinical standpoint, it really comes down to this framework here. A bad habit is something you do automatically, like biting your nails. You might wish you could stop, but it's not blowing up your life. Addiction, though, is defined by 3 key things. 1, you've lost control over it. 2, you keep doing it even when it's causing significant harm. And 3, there are clear negative consequences in your life because of it. That is the line in the sand.
Now, if any of these patterns are starting to sound a little too familiar, either for yourself or someone you care about, it can feel really overwhelming. But the single most important message from the entire medical community is this: there is hope. Behavioral addictions are absolutely treatable conditions. So, what does treatment look like? Well, it's usually a few things working together. The foundation is often psychotherapy, especially something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. That basically helps people spot the triggers and thought patterns that lead to the behavior and then develop healthier ways to cope. Now, there aren't any FDA-approved drugs specifically for these yet, but some meds used for substance abuse are showing real promise. And there are even cool approaches like recreational therapy, which helps people rebuild their confidence by finding new, healthy, and rewarding activities. This quote from the American Society of Addiction Medicine just sums up the modern view so perfectly. It frames addiction not as a moral failing, not as a lack of willpower, but as what the science tells us it is: a treatable chronic medical disease. It's this complex dance between our brain circuits, our genetics, our environment, and our own life experiences. And thinking about it that way helps strip away the stigma and opens the door to effective, compassionate care. And that brings us to our final thought. We live in a world that is, in so many ways, engineered to grab our attention and lock us into these little dopamine loops, from the infinite scroll on social media to the reward systems baked into video games. Understanding the science behind behavioral addiction isn't just some academic exercise. It's a vital tool for just navigating the world we live in today. It empowers us to ask the right questions about our own behaviors and, at the end of the day, to stay in control. Thanks for joining me.